Alright, so I'm gonna go for like kind of broad spoilers into the Spellmonger books for this video. If you haven't read them, I would suggest clicking it off. Though if you do care, it's only up to about, I think the earliest it was mentioned was in the third Hawkmaiden book. But if you know who the Forsaken are, you're gonna be able to follow where I'm going with this. Right, so one of the things that commonly comes up whenever you read about mythology enough is you start to notice a lot of broad archetypes. Not everything is going to fit into any sort of situation, so no two mythologies are exactly alike, except for the Greek and the Romans, but all mythologies added together tend towards certain things. One of those is I'm going to be talking about two of those right now. And the order will make sense when I start talking about them. Usually a mythology, in some sense, has what's called a great mother in it in some way. The most obvious example of this is in Greek mythology is Terra, and they typically represent the earth. Fun fact, Geb is actually an incredibly unique god because he's one of the few examples of a male earth god, which you just don't see a lot of. But for whatever reason, a lot of ancient people always tended to represent the earth, or the earth, as being feminine, and having a lot of motherly characteristics. On some level, that sort of makes sense. You were at one point part of your mother. It doesn't matter who you were a part of your mother at some point, just like you were a part of the earth at some point. So people coming to the kind of conclusion that the earth is like a motherly figure that you're always going to be somewhat a part of, and is always going to look after you in some sense because of that, is a kind of a natural motif that you would expect to come up. And we see that in the Spellmonger books. The Great Mothers, or the Celestial Mothers, they are fundamentally a part of this one massive organism that was Callidore in its ancient past. They were everyone's mom, basically. They were kind and they were accepting and they loved you regardless of what your situation was. That was what the Great Mothers are supposed to do. They are the ancient mother of Callidore, and they fit very squarely, easily into that Great Mother role that you commonly see in mythology. I'm not going to go over every little detail of this. If you want a really good breakdown of this, I would suggest Wondrium. They have a course on mythologies. Just take that and you should get what I'm talking about here. This isn't sponsored, by the way. I just use the app. I'm sure you're sitting there thinking, wait, so you're talking about the Great Mother, but what about the other parent? Yeah, that's what I'm getting to. I think the Spellmonger books do an incredibly cool thing with how they create the Great Father figure of the mythology in this world. Because the Great Fathers in most mythology are typically characters that are associated with the sky in some way. You see this with Zeus, Yahweh, Odin in some senses. Olaron is that one, the other one. Even female chief deities typically sort of fill that same role. Amaterasu is technically female, but she has a very masculine bent to most of her stories. But a lot of the great fathers in our mythologies are typically sky fathers. They represent the sky in some way, and on some intuitive level that makes some sort of sense. Like, archetypically speaking, your father is somebody who you're supposed to try and live up to and outdo, but is somebody who is always going to be fundamentally somewhat distant from you. You were never a part of your father in the same way you were a part of your mother, if that makes any sort of sense. And again, I'm talking this as sort of a broad archetype sense. Whenever we talk about these sort of archetypes of the great fathers and the great mothers, it's worth noting that it's an archetype and it doesn't necessarily denote the sex of the entity in question. It's just, again, averaging out all these mythologies, these certain trends tend to show up. And with the Spellmonger books, I think Terry did like a really good job with incorporating a cool sci-fi element to this. Because what is the Great Father of Callidore? Well, it's the New Horizon. Commonly in these mythologies, you have a Sky Father acting upon the Earth and creating a garden or a place for humanity, right? So the common example of this is the Garden of Eden. We saw a similar thing with like how gods like Odin slayed Ymir and then created the 9 realms from his body, right? But there's these great sky fathers, and they come in and they create Eden, basically. And that's exactly what happens in the Spellmonger books. The New Horizon comes in, they get this desolate kind of wasteland, and they recreate that into the 9 duchy, or the 5 duchies that we see during the series. The Great Skyfather is literally a sci-fi spaceship seeding the world with new life. And I just thought that that was a really cool way to blend in that sort of sci-fi element and keep it thematically in tune with the fantasy element. Because you take the high-tech sci-fi stuff and you make it fill the role that a god or a goddess would have filled in a fantasy setting. The creator gods of this world are a very large and very benevolent organism, and the father of Callidore is a very distant, faraway spaceship. And I just thought that that was an incredibly cool thing that I felt like making a video out of. I hope I explained myself well enough. This all makes sense in my head. If you have questions to what I mean, let me know in the comments. Sometimes I think I can write my thoughts out better than I can actually say them, but I just thought that was cool.